Well, taking a look at the week 7 study questions on the second half of Plato's Phaedo. Looking at these questions, these are difficult questions. And I did my best, but I think that the reason that they're difficult questions is because the second half of the Phaedo is a difficult text to read. It's not easy page by page to understand what he's saying, but it's especially not easy to see what his overall strategy is. So I did my best, and we're all doing our best. But number one, what are the two objections to the immortality of the soul that Socrates must meet in the second half of the Phaedo? That's important to understand. I give a lot more emphasis to the Simmias objection than to the Cebes one, which is the reverse of what Plato himself does. Socrates spends a lot more time addressing Cebes than he does Simmias. And I suppose that's because I think that the problem that Simmias identifies is to be found at the very heart of any exploration of the philosophy of death, and especially the text that I've chosen for this class, and that is the question of dependency of what Plato calls soul, psyche, or mind, or consciousness, on the physical, on the body. And the crucial question of dependency is whether the soul or consciousness or mind can exist without body. And that, I think, is such a crucial question that the fact that it is, in fact, Simmias's question makes it probably the most important thing about the dialogue to me. Whereas that is the Simmias objection. The whole analogy of soul to body as harmony to lyre is really an objection that says that these two different aspects of the human person, it may be that soul is the relation of soul to body is like the relation of the harmony of a musical instrument to the musical instrument, that is something distinct from it, but something utterly dependent on it. So that if you don't have the physical instrument in proper working order, you can't have the harmony. If we extend the analogy, then of course you can't. If you don't have a properly functioning organism, especially nervous system, as we know, especially brain, as we know, then you can't have consciousness or soul or mind. And that's a big objection. I think it's a crucial problem. And as we'll see, it's a problem that will pop up explicitly in Paul Landsberg's The Experience of Death. The Cebes objection, as I take it, is that we have no reason to believe, even if the soul does outlast the body, that it is therefore immortal. That is, it may be that it's like the cloak that outlasts the weaver, but itself is doomed to dissolve at a certain point. So Socrates has to meet that objection too, and I think that he takes the objection to mean that he's got to prove that the soul is the kind of thing that can't die, and maybe that's why he takes so much more space in the latter half of the dialogue, addressing that issue and trying to establish that the soul is just not the kind of thing that can die. Ever. Number two, how does Socrates try to undermine Simmias's idea that the relation of soul to body is like the relation of harmony to lyre? I think that his strongest point is one that was picked up on, I think, very strongly in the discussion board for this reading, and that is the ability of the soul or the consciousness or the mental part of us to say no to the physical. That is the famous thing. Just because the body makes us feel thirst does not mean that we necessarily drink, which would indicate that there is some autonomy of soul from body, that we are not utterly determined in our mental state by our physical state. I think that that's true and is an incredibly important point. Question is whether that autonomy, in terms of the familiar instances in which we experience it, like I'm thirsty, but I decide whether I drink, whether that can really hold up the idea that the soul can exist independently from the body. I don't know. Number three, Socrates has a conception of soul such that death can't apply to it. How? Well, this is in relation to his meeting the objection of Cebes. It's a tough argument. And again, I would say that the strongest part of that argument is that the essence of soul is life. So that to imagine the soul dying is trying to imagine like the number three being even. It's just a category mistake, let's say. Trying to apply something to it that just cannot apply to it. A category like death is really something that applies to the body, not to the soul. Just like a category like even is something that applies to numbers like 4 and 6 and not 3 and 5. I think also that this does harken back to an earlier argument, the argument from affinity, in the earlier part of the dialogue, that argues that the soul is like the forms, the soul is like ideas. And similarly, we don't say that ideas or concepts die. They're eternal, they're timeless, and so must be at least some aspect of the soul.